Reyes, and today I'm doing a solo episode of Un Poquito podcast. Un Poquito, exploring Latin culture little by little. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe, hit the bell notification, leave a comment. Comments make you sexy. You were already sexy, but if you're listening on Apple Podcast or Spotify or any other podcast apps, make sure to like us there, follow us there, leave a rate and review, 5 stars, please. If you're looking to support us, we have a Discord. It's public. It's free. You can hang out with me, Dominic, and even Josh the American. There's so many other fans there that you can talk to. There's so many rooms that you can explore. A lot of good stuff there. And if you're looking to support us financially, we have a Patreon. It starts as low as $2 a month, and you get early access to ad-free content, access to bonus content, such as our Patreon episodes, and access to all the little projects that we've been starting, like my balloon tutorials and autistic mic drop. Also, be sure to follow us at Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, even Facebook at Un Poquito Pod on all platforms. So, hope you enjoy the show, and I'll get started like right now. Hello, I'm Rian Reyes, and today we're doing a solo episode of Un Poquito. I mean, Josh is also here, but I'm the only one on camera today. Hi, Josh.
Hello.
Hell yeah. Today, I wanted to talk about something that I've kind of been recently getting interested in. And we won't go super deep dive because I know there's a lot of fun people that know a lot more about it. And eventually I'd like to have a guest. But we're going to go over what I currently know about it, which is Lucha Libre, or also known as luchadores. It's Mexican wrestling, pro wrestling, and there's a lot of fun stuff about it. I got into it because recently I had found out in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Bad Bunny, popular Puerto Rican pop star, is going to be playing a Marvel character known as El Muerto, who is sort of Spider-Man's answer to Bane, which further pushes the idea that I've been saying since I was 5 years old. Spider-Man is Marvel's Batman. Fuck Iron Man. But I digress. So I thought that was really interesting, and I sort of went on a deep dive because I had never realized as a kid just how important like luchadors are in Mexico. Like it goes so much more like beyond. So from what I can understand, historically, what's known as freestyle wrestling or folk wrestling kind of started in a lot of different places at the same time. Roughly around the mid-1800s, like 1860s. Suspiciously, it happened in America like a couple years after it happened in Mexico. But there's no proof that those are correlated, so we won't go there. But what freestyle wrestling is, it was a form of wrestling combat that diverted from the recognized rules of Greco-Roman wrestling. With Roman wrestling, you have the stances, you can only move within those stances, and it's a lot of pinning and grappling, and the idea is to pull the person out of the circle, and it was very specific rules in a very specific setting. Freestyle wrestling averts that. You're allowed to run around, you're allowed to use moves that aren't recognized as normal grappling, like, you know, what's that, when you tether line somebody?
Clothesline?
Yes. It was just a lot more fun for people to do. So the reason that I believe that it started in Mexico first is because freestyle wrestling became the coined term of this genre in America. But that's literally what Lucha Libre means in Spanish. The literal translation is free fighting. So the reason that you can't say that there's a direct correlation is because historically, the path that pro wrestling took in America started from something completely different than in Mexico. So I'll briefly touch on that, but we're not going to do a whole episode on American wrestling today. American wrestling was also known as folk wrestling, and essentially what it was strong men, like circus strong men, or just like traveling acts that would challenge commoners in the towns that they were visiting to a wrestling match to improve their reputation for their act. And so I'll explain in a second, but that's very different from Mexican wrestling. That was one person who made a very public persona for themselves and became that celebrity through that traveling act. what you know as amateur wrestling today in America was essentially what was happening in Mexico. Was people were starting groups together in communities where they would challenge each other. And another thing that separates Mexican and American wrestling is the invention of the luchador mask. The luchador mask, there's a little bit of diverse history behind this, depending on who's telling it and what the argument is. Some people are adverse to the mask because it's considered to a very small group a form of appropriation because it's inspired. It's essentially it was considered a Spanish interpretation of a sort of ritualistic preparation that Aztecs and Mayans had before combat, which was that they would paint their face. Specifically, it'd be close quarter combat. It was a similar thing for Aztecs and Mayans. It was essentially like a gladiator style combat. It was for show. It was to one champion would be pitted against another to prove who was more powerful. Now, this started in the 1860s, but it didn't become popularized nationally until the 1930s, because that's when Salvador Luterat founded the first league of luchador, which was known as Empresa Mexicana de Lucha Libre. That was a national competition where all of these regions that had formed their own leagues could compete against one another so that one person could be named the champion of Mexican Lucha Libre. And this is what started pro wrestling in Mexico. And this is where the culture of wrestling changes between Mexico and America very drastically. Because this is where we go back to them incorporating masks. Mexico was the first source of wrestling that did this. And it's been kind of, it's not necessarily appropriated, but it hasn't been incorporated in other wrestling leagues, like in Canada, America, and even Japan, but it's always in reference to luchadors. What started happening with Mexican wrestling is rather than have a public persona, you kind of created a alter ego, an identity, and this is the coolest aspect for me about Mexican wrestling. They were like the closest thing you could have to real life superheroes because they were an actual real person with an alter ego, a private life, and a public persona, and it was all because of the mask. And that's where the tradition came from. To dishonor a luchador, you remove his mask and then he's never allowed to wrestle again. And that actually became, and it's still done today, one of the qualifiers for certain matches. I don't necessarily know if it's about beef between two wrestlers. Sometimes it has to do with a regional competition's like rule set, but that can be the consequence. For one luchador to rise to stardom, he has to defeat and dishonor another luchador, and that's sort of the stake that's created. There's like real life consequence to a career in wrestling in Mexico by being dishonored, because you're never allowed to wrestle ever again, and that's like intense. And I feel like that's one of the things that makes luchador not only much more theatrical than American wrestling, but at the same time much more real for people because it's personal. And it's really interesting to me that became a thing. That goes into what else I wanted to talk about, which was because Lucha Libre became such a staple in pop culture in Mexico, it started being incorporated in comic books and television. And so growing up in America, I always thought, there was a part of me that always thought that when you would see a luchador in American television and it wasn't specifically like the main topic of the show, it was like them making fun of us somehow because it looked like they were just like talking about something they didn't understand. And then like as I learned more about Lucha Libre, specifically for this episode, I find that that's actually just how popular luchadores has become. Is like even Canada, there's a section, there's a mobile company in Canada that's their mascot for like no reason, because that's like how far Lucha Libre has spanned as an iconic symbol. It's known in Australia, it's known in Japan as a specifically Mexican concept, and I thought that was always really cool. There's even, if you guys remember from the Mike Peralta episode, there's even a subgenre of horror films that's specifically dedicated to luchadors essentially becoming monster hunters. I thought that was really cool, and I'm actually like super interested in watching those films and reading those comics now. It also brings me back to something that me and Dominic learned together recently, which was that Lucha Libre, which we've talked about before, is actually based on a true story about someone who's alive today. Do you remember his name? Fray Tormenta, which translates to the Storm Friar or the Friar of Storms, which is like a dope fucking name, was a real life priest, a real life Catholic priest who ran an orphanage, and to make money to support the orphanage, he became a Lucha Libre. And it became such an iconic thing, not only with him as a person, but with Mexico in general, like that he retired, I think 20 years ago, and he still wears his mask. He's like 89 right now, and he still runs the orphanage as a priest, and he still wears the mask to honor the tradition, that because he was never defeated, because he was never dishonored, and because people only know him, or for the most part people know him as Fray Tormenta, he refuses to take it off publicly. He cannot be seen without the mask, and I thought that was super cool. He's like a real life superhero. So I've been meaning to ask you, do you drink tea?
I do drink tea.
What kind of tea do you enjoy?
I usually drink black tea.
Black tea. Well, so the reason I ask is we have a lot of great selections at legacyteasandspices.com, our sponsor. It's a shop run by my mom, and it's a great source for artisanal blends for teas, spices, and even sugars. But specifically, I wanted to recommend some for you because she just started some that you might enjoy. One new flavor is Chicano Chai, which is a sort of churro and cream infused tea. It's a black tea, so it's caffeinated, and it's combined with chai spices. So it has clove, has cinnamon, ginger. It's a very relaxing morning tea. So it's soothing tea, but it still gives you energy to start your day. And if you guys would also be interested, check out legacyteasandspices.com and use coupon code UP20 for 20% off your next order. So I've kind of been going a little bit all over the place about the history of Lucha Libre, but I wanted to focus a little bit on what popularized Lucha Libre. So as I said, the official National League started in the 30s, but it wouldn't reach the same level that like WWF reached in America until the 50s and 60s. Now, part of that had to do with the invention of the television and what that did for publicizing wrestling to the masses, but that also had to do with some of the first ever celebrities of wrestling. One of them that I believe is so far the most notable in my research is a man named El Santo, who started in 1942 and had a career that spanned, I believe, over 5 decades. So he finished maybe a few years before he passed, and until he retired, he did not reveal his face until I believe like 2 or 3 months before he actually passed away. He was like the Hulk Hogan of Mexican wrestling. He was like the wrestler to know. He's very iconic. He was the first person to use this. He coined the silver mask that a lot of people recognize. He was like a huge thing for wrestling. And he was part of what started wrestlers in movies and wrestlers in storytelling. And I think that a lot of what we know today as Lucha Libre would not happen without him and other wrestlers like him. The other reason that I wanted to talk about this era of wrestling is because this is where high-flying signature moves comes from. It started with luchadors and made its way to other aspects of pro wrestling. And this is, in fact, where Japan and America gets their signature moves from. It all started with Mexico, which I thought was a super dope pack. Do you watch wrestling, right? Do you remember any like signature moves from
Swanton Bomb.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Bomb.
Anything that required climbing a tightrope, anything that required... That all started with luchadors.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that at all.
So looking back on all of that, I kind of now enjoy much more all of the stuff that I start to learn about, like how luchador is represented in American forms of media. Like Bane is so much more cooler now that I know that history. Superheroes, comic book heroes and villains are so much cooler when they're Mexican and they're influenced by luchadors, because it adds just that aspect of like cultural importance, and like it adds an era of real life folk heroism, like modern folk stories are a thing in Mexico because of this. And I think that's really cool. I definitely would like to see more of that. I'm excited to see El Muerto. I'd like to see like more Mexican American writers kind of incorporate that. I think that there is another El Muerte character that's similar, but it's kind of more along the lines of like a Chicano version of the Crow. But I have to look into that more. But I love that aspect of it, and I love seeing it in modern. Like, it makes me appreciate the cartoons that I grew up on, like Mucha Lucha. Did you watch Mucha Lucha as a kid?
I didn't.
It was so great, like knowing that all the stuff that they reference in that show, you think it's like just a Mexican main character in an American television show, but then you come to understand that all started in Mexico. So it's like so much more cooler to have that information and rewatch that cartoon. It's also the ringtone that I give to Dominic, so every time he calls me, it's the Mucha Lucha theme.
So Mucha Lucha came out in 2002. So I was 12. I was already too old to be watching.
Dude, I watch.
I don't know why. I remember seeing it and being like, "Well, this is for kids," but I was only 12, so I don't know what I was thinking.
I mean, it's hard to. I'm autistic, so I don't know if that's why. But I love cartoons. I watch cartoons today. Not like every cartoon, you know what I mean? But like I got into Steven Universe, even though I was already like a senior in high school when it came out.
I haven't watched it.
It's cool. It's honestly like an American style of animation, but it's essentially an anime.
Okay.
Like if you drew it as an anime, the story would stay exactly the same.
I understand.
It's really cool. Do you like anime?
I never was into anime. Everything I watched was American.
I just
I
realized
like American animation.
because I've said this before, but so Latino media, especially like in Mexico, is so similar to Japanese media that it would be dope if someone made a luchador anime.
There's gotta be. How is there not one?
Awesome would that be? I know that there is a wrestling anime in Japan, but to make it like specifically Lucha Libre, like the fact, like how much lore and like folky storytelling is already in Lucha Libre, it's perfect. And now I'm super excited about that idea. Someone get on that. I don't know enough about it to do it myself. But I definitely watch the shit out of that.
There's gotta be one. There's just pro wrestling animes.
Yeah.
All my friends watch them, and I just never. I couldn't even watch like Pokemon, or I just couldn't get into it.
I'll be honest. I should stop opening it. Yeah, I'll be honest. I'm kind of disappointed that Japan does not recognize Mexico at all. Like, my little brother told me this, and I don't know if it's real, but the company that not publishes, that is in charge of Dragon Ball Z in Japan, does not sell it to Mexico. So there's a huge community of Dragon Ball Z fans in Mexico, but it's all bootleg. And I don't know what that's about. But it's also like, I brought this up. Oh, I brought it up in the last podcast. But it's also like, do you know the anime Gundam?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
So you know how every country has their own Gundam?
No, I did not know this.
Every country has their own Gundam.
Okay.
Mexico is called the Tequila Gundam. And it is a tan robot with a sombrero and a curling mustache.
It's from like the 80s, isn't it?
And cactus arms.
Cactus arms.
100% this is real. You can Google it right now.
Okay. Oh, that's funny.
I'm going to leave a pause right here so that later when he finds it, he can show you guys what the fuck I'm talking about. Right there.
I'll put it right there.
Look at that shit. That's real. And they call it the Tequila Gundam. That's real. Oh, it's so disappointing that Japan sleeps on Mexico. It'd be the coolest thing ever to see a Mexican anime.
Oh, I mean, it's not exactly. I mean, it is. It is. It's so bad.
It's so bad.
It's so bad.
You look at every other one. Every other Gundam is inspired by like. I can see how
He's
they
got
kind of
spiky arms. They're not.
They're.
I know they're cactuses. They're cactus. It's obvious.
Yeah, they're plant green.
Yeah. Tequila Gundam. That's nuts. Called him Tequila.
We're getting towards the end. We kept this one short because it's mostly just me today. One last thing I wanted to talk about is Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight. I understand that at this point, people are in on the joke, and while it wasn't not like accepted well, in time people grew to love this character. But I am still to this day disappointed in what they did to Bane. Because of one simple fact. If you're going to make him a white guy, if you're going to make him European, you can at least pick a Spanish actor. Because I wholeheartedly believe that how they portrayed Bane and the voice that they gave the character, I know it was Tom Hardy's decision, but Javier Bardem would have made a substantially better Bane. How cool would that have been? Imagine all of the lines from that movie, but it's Javier Bardem. I can't do an impression. I wanted to right now, but I was just like, Ramses, he's number one. That's not the character. I hope that this new Batman brings an actual like Latino character. It would be so dope. I know there's not a lot of like super tall Mexicans to match that stature, and I feel like that's the only reason that they keep fucking avoiding it. But there's someone out there that can play Bane.
How funny would it be if they just made Bane a like short Mexican?
That'd be hilarious. That's the funny thing too. Is like Tom Hardy's like 5'9".
Oh, is he really?
I think.
I don't know.
So it's like it's not the height thing. You're just fucking up on purpose. Media, get your shit together. Because specifically Un Poquito, I want to say, has proven at least... No, wait, you're the only one. I was going to say, if you look back in the history between me and Dominic and our social media, we've proven at least 3 times that there are very large Mexicans out there, above like 6'1". You know, Josh the American is one example. Our friend Armando Torres is another. Melvin! You guys remember Melvin? So there's tall Latinos. All this to say... There's so much more that we can do with luchador representation. And I hope we get there. It's already growing in America. Like as many amateur leagues of pro wrestling that you've ever heard of, there's just as many Lucha Libre leagues. I know that there's one in Boston. I think there's one in Chicago. And I'm like 98% positive there's one in Los Angeles. And I'm going to find it. And I'm going to watch the shit out of those wrestlers. Anyway... Thank you for joining me for the solo episode. I hope you guys liked it as much as I did. If not, the hosts are going to come back next week, I promise. But thank you for watching to the end. If you like, what's a favorite luchador fact that you know? Or what's your favorite wrestler's name, Mexican or not? What's your favorite wrestling move? Like and subscribe. Turn on the bell notification. And all that good stuff. And from me and Josh, you can say it with me because no one else is here, I guess. From us at Un Poquito, don't fly. It's very late in the episode, but I just thought of a really funny thing about the fact that a wrestler was also a priest. Is that if you take a confessional from him, he goes from a luchador to a escuchador. Because he fixes your problems by listening instead. Uses. I think that's funny, and I hope you thought that was funny. I like for you to record.